room, I see mostly staff. You can
Coleman's
ask.
out of town. All right, good morning, everybody. We are at our Monday, February 13th workshop. This morning's agenda is going to be somewhat delayed and a little late, maybe at least in part. It's my understanding the auditor is not here.
The auditor is stuck in a...
And ETC, our citizen survey individual, is not going to make it this morning. So let's just move right straight to the budget update.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to say something and then have Scott and Alan. We don't have a formal presentation this morning, but just to recap, you should each have copies of the operating and capital budget. I've arranged to, and I've already met with some of you just to go through those documents and answer questions, and we're, of course, delighted to do that, and should try to do that this week if we possibly can, but we'd be happy to try to answer any questions you might have today. But there is an important item on the agenda tonight that I want to make sure you are aware of what the significance is. It is setting the hearing. So you don't really take any action. You're not, by setting the hearing, you're not approving a budget, obviously. That happens in 2 weeks, at least in theory, on the 27th. But in the action tonight, you do set a not to exceed tax rate. And that tax rate is $16.92. That's the number that we've been talking about and we've presented before. That includes the 34-cent increase over the current rate. That's not to exceed. So the significance of that is that you can do something less than. You can establish a lower rate, but you can't do more than that at the time of the hearing. If you want to leave your room to have a tax increase higher than $16.92, you should change that action tonight and pick a number that you want. But our recommendation has been $16.92. That's what we've talked about at this table, and that's what we presented in the council. That provides for the 34-cent increase in the tax rate. But by acting tonight, you're setting the not to exceed number. You can do less than at the time of the hearing, but you can't do more than. I just want to make sure you're aware of that provision in what you're doing tonight. But other than that, Mayor and Council, we're all available here to answer questions that you might have. I do have scheduled with, I think, most of you opportunities to review the documents.
Anybody have anything?
Detail, so.
Christine?
Well, I've got some, I guess, do you want me to just ask some general questions? I did have a chance to go through and I've got some real detailed questions, but I guess just some general discussion if we could have it from the council table. And the items that I had written down were economic development, noticing in the budget, it looks like there's one less person there. Just trying to figure out what the plans are for economic development and how that's going to go forward.
Okay.
Sister City Commission, it looked like there were some differences there, and I just would appreciate an update on that because that was a decision that we made last year. And I know, just as a follow-up discussion, I've not had a chance to visit with other individuals at the council, but discussion around human rights in the meeting that we had last week, I think it would be appropriate to have some discussion about options there as well.
On those three, I can comment on each of those a little bit and then get back to you with more definition. On the economic development side, we have one vacant position now, which we intend to fill. So the budget shouldn't show a reduction in staffing, but I'm looking at Alan here. He may have more detail on that one. Looks like he does.
Alan McKinley, Deputy City Manager. As part of the reduction plan for the city manager's budget in total was a reduction of one position, either through economic development or through the city manager's office. So there's one between the two.
Okay.
And the city.
So it happens to show up in economic development in the budget.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
On sister cities, I'm not aware of any change from last year to this. We had a proposal last year to transfer sister cities to the partnership or some other entity. That fell through. That did not happen. And so as far as I know, the budget proposal for this year would mimic the current arrangement with current appropriations. And your third question on human rights, I suppose that should be just an open conversation here at the table based on the meeting you had last week.
Anybody have any comments after our human rights meeting the other day? Any thoughts? I think there's going to be, Rudy's going to give us some information as a follow-up that we requested regarding some of the numbers and some of the cases and some of the needs and what that potential revenue source might be, I think, Rudy. So if you could get back to us with that information, that'd be helpful in our discussion, I think.
I would agree. I guess my read of the meeting last week was, I think we need to look at other options. And one of those options would be, because you've got other cities that have successfully done it, working with the state in a way that we're currently not working with the state. And I would just like to have us explore that.
It seemed to me like on the cases, it seemed like the state is trying to compete. We're kind of competing with them for some of those cases. If we want to get more revenue through the case handling, how do we work together, I guess, so to speak, to get a fair division of that?
Well, and is our current structure the most efficient, effective structure, organizational structure, looking at how other cities that are mandated under the law to have a human rights department? I'm very supportive of human rights, but I just think that we need to revisit, is the current organizational structure the right organizational structure? And that may even mean, is it reporting to us as a council? Is that correct? Should we look at it reporting through legal? Would that strengthen it? Are there other departments that it might be reporting to, that could report to? I think all of those options need to be looked at.
Mrs. Hensley, council members, we've talked about this in years past, and I'd be happy to work with Rudy and staff and come back to you with all the options we can identify. But I want to be clear. I understand what you're talking about. You're talking about other organizational arrangements within city government. There has been in the past. I suspect Rudy doesn't like this discussion, but there has been discussion about just shifting the function to the state altogether. I think maybe Mr. Coleman has talked about that. Maybe some of you have. So there's different avenues to go there.
I think that they all need to be reviewed, and we need to look. My feeling is human rights right now is limping along, and it's not as robust as it could be. Maybe that's our fault. Maybe that's the organizational structure. But I think it would be a disservice to the city if we allowed it to continue the way that it currently is. That's only one member's view. I don't know where everybody else is at, but.
Well, in the past, I think the department has worked very closely with our legal department. And, there may be some better, clearer relationship with that department as well, because a lot of the cases require certainly legal input. Anybody else have any thoughts? All right.
Can I just be clear? Is that your desire as a council? Do you want me to pursue those things or not?
I really think the presentation they gave us, that we did about 50 cases this year, and on a conservative estimate, the state's doing 310 of ours. If those are supposed to be ours, I think we need to take a look and see, could we possibly do 350 cases a year? That's going to take a serious investment in bodies, and but if it's our responsibility, I think we need to take a look at it.
It'd be definitely a restructuring that has to occur to do anything of that nature.
Yeah, Mr. Moore, I don't know for sure, and I haven't looked at the numbers, I haven't talked to Rudy, but to go from 50 to 350, you're talking about probably bringing more staff on, and I'm not sure we're in a position today as an organization to add a lot of staff to any department.
Let me just ask a question and bring this back around. Question for Mr. Lester. We cannot, if I remember correctly from the meeting, maybe Rudy or Mr. Lester can answer this. The agency, whether it's the State Human Rights Commission or the City Human Rights Commission gets the first crack at anybody that makes the first point of contact. Is that right, Mr. Lester?
As I understand it, yes, that's correct.
And so in order for us to get more of those cases, we need to either have to do more promotion, which is a good thing, or we'd have to change the state law that says that the state would have to refer those if a city has a Human Rights Commission, and not all do. I think is it over 25,000 or 50,000? I can't remember. 30,000. In order to get those, we'd have to change the state law to make sure that they come back to the state. I mean, is that fair to say?
Oh, I believe so, yes.
So I think we should pursue the change in the law, but knowing what I said on Thursday, it's very difficult because they want to keep those because they're apparently making money off of doing those cases. And so I think for the council to make a decision on this, we need to have that information in front of us. So if we could get from staff, this is how the system works. This is how we could get more cases coming in that we could make money off of from HUD. And these are the changes that have to be made to do that. Would that work for the council?
Well, but I
you
think
do
that
that?
would be one avenue. I think the other two avenues are looking at the organizational
Right.
structure, whether it be reporting through legal or be rolled into the state.
Right. And I have a real concern that we might be heading down a path that we can't do anything about, which is that if they make first contact with the state, they get the first crack at the case. And we can't change that, to my knowledge, without legislative change that says if the jurisdiction it comes from gets the work on the case. Does that make sense, Mayor?
I think we need to look at it, get as much input as we can.
Is that correct, Rudy? You can address any statement I made if you want.
Rudy, why don't you come?
Mayor and Council, Rudy Sims, Human Rights Director. What really needs to be revisited is the legislative law that actually defines the relationship between the state and the city. Currently, the cities, all of the local cities are at a disadvantage in that they are inhibited contractually with EEOC because the state defines the relationship and they have chosen historically, and it's their choice, to block any city trying to get a contract with the EEOC. Now, most cities have, fewer now have contracts with HUD than before for the very same reason. The state is going into their local territories and taking up all of the cases they can because of the type of contractual relationship and the monies that can be derived from a contract with HUD and EEOC. I contend that we could be more self-sufficient if we could get direct contracts with EEOC and HUD, and those revenues would support staff, any additional staff that we could add. During the transition point, we might have to make some initial investments in order to get to the level to handle the case capacity.
Thanks, Rudy.
Okay?
Rudy, do we employ any sort of a screening process similar to what was described at the state level? Do we have anything that's similar to that?
No, we assist people with their complaints, in writing their complaints. We take the intakes. We make a determination at that point whether or not they need to be processed by us and filed as a case, or whether or not we have jurisdiction or not, or whether it needs to be referred to another agency, including the state agency. Oftentimes, we get many inquiries, not just from suburbs, but other rural areas. I've gotten as far away as Waterloo and had to refer them to the state. All right, we don't want to process those cases. There's plenty of casework, all right, and complaints generated just from the city of Des Moines alone, that if we had the proper guidance and the proper legal structure with the state Civil Rights Act and the way that it's administered through the state agency, that we could do our own casework and have those realize those revenues from both HUD and EEOC.
And I guess that kind of led into my next question. It seemed like the way the state operated was that everyone who came in the door or made a phone call had to fill out a form that then they were able to review. And it seemed like in the discussion I had with you, a lot of time is spent deciphering if the case even belongs to the city, if it belongs to the state, if it belongs to another city. And I think maybe even structurally, we could save a significant amount of your man hours if instead of talking to someone for an hour and a half and finding out they don't even belong at the city, having a form that they fill out, and then we can screen that to see if it even applies, or we can forward that form somewhat, rather than spending, an hour and a half per call.
We're not exactly doing that type of lengthy screening just to determine jurisdiction. That's relatively quick.
Right, and I guess that would be my suggestion, is that maybe we start doing something along those lines.
I have a question for you, Rudy. Just to be clear, if I'm a case of being discriminated against in housing, if I call the state, they're going to gobble. If I'm in the city of Des Moines and I call the state, they're going to gobble that up and say that's ours.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
If I call the city, you guys are going to definitely work with me. If it has merit and it stays in the city. And so the relationship is that the part of the problem is people don't know where to go. And so they see something about Iowa civil rights and they call Iowa civil rights versus calling the city of Des Moines.
That's part of the problem, yes.
And then the other problem is, just to clarify what the problems are, the other problem is that the state defines their relationship with HUD on these reimbursements, and they also, at the same time, define the relationship that the cities have with HUD on the reimbursements.
That's not exactly.
Can you clarify that for me? That's the part I'm having trouble.
The state as well as the city each have contracts with HUD. Both of us enforce the same law. In our case, we enforce it within the geographic Des Moines, all right? In the state of the case, they've got the entire state, all right? It's easier for them to sit in Des Moines and do it and not do it out state, all right? And so they aggressively test, do housing testing, do advertising in the city of Des Moines, as well as elsewhere.
Iowa Civil Rights does.
Yeah, all right, and so they benefit from that with their contractual relationship with HUD. We have the same relationship with HUD. It's with EEOC, we don't.
Okay.
All right? The advantage that the state has is that they've got a lot more housing investigators. They've invested in testing and in advertising right here in the city of Des Moines. Okay?
So you'd like to have the same relationship with the EEOC that the state has?
Yeah, not just but I think other local human rights agencies are in the very same dilemma. And I think that by bringing them together and using an approach with the legislature, either with the League of Human Rights, with the legislative lobbying committee that the city has, that we might be able to at least move the legislature enough so that they change the law, so that the state commission will give preference to local communities to process their own cases, so we can derive the resources from both EEOC and HUD.
It would seem to be, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Rudy, you need to make sure that we have language at our meeting Wednesday morning.
I'm going to try to have it to you by Tuesday.
Yeah, because
Okay,
we meet at
yeah.
7:30 Wednesday morning at the Capitol.
I just have one more question.
Okay.
The question is, can this be resolved without legislation by approaching Civil Rights Commission?
I've already approached the Iowa Civil Rights Commission. They made it perfectly clear that it's the revenue resources that they were after, not just in this city, but the other ones as well.
But it could be resolved without legislation if we had the same relationship with civil rights that we have with on HUD cases versus EEOC.
Yes, if they were amenable to that type of cooperation. My, every indication is that I've been given from this Iowa Civil Rights Director is that no, they're not going to be referring our city's cases back to us, not housing cases, not EEOC cases, because of the revenue that is derived from them, and they've become dependent upon that.
Rudy, is that the relationship where you said when we close a case, they reimburse us $50, but then the state
Absolutely.
just reimbursed $500 on the same case,
Yes.
and they didn't even do the work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they just write a number
So
down.
that's the dilemma.
Yeah. Well, that's a dilemma that this commission and other commissions around the state have been living with for years. All right? I just said it's wrong. I argued that with the previous Iowa Civil Rights Director. He relinquished about $100 for a temporary period. All right? And then it went back to 50.
Rudy, for our, maybe included with the other information you're going to give us on Tuesday, could you also quickly pull together that calendar year summary of cases that you have that are outstanding, what types they are, how many you took in this year, what types they are, how many you closed, so we can see kind of in a summary comparably to
Sure.
previous years, how we're doing, what we're doing?
Okay.
That'd be helpful.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor and council members, just an observation. One of the things we've talked about recently with respect to our ongoing budget discussions with the state of Iowa and struggling with our own budget is this whole notion of unfunded mandates. And we just had a discussion around human rights where we have state law which basically prescribes how you are going to organize and provide a certain service. And what results in this case is a state agency which thinks it does the same thing as the local agency, and a local agency that's trying to do something, at least in part, that a state agency is trying to do. You know, it really isn't very logical government when you think about it. And somebody hasn't thought through very well the division of responsibilities, and I think in this case, it's sort of the taxpayer who doesn't come out on top, because we're all trying to do a certain thing, and this competition that results from it isn't particularly healthy. I mean, I think we're all scrambling for dollars when we're trying to support a certain administrative function within our governments, and it just doesn't make much sense. And I think Mr. Meyer's right, if I understand his points, and we're not going to be able to change the law right this second. But in terms of a long-term strategy, I think it's the kind of issue we should be talking about with the legislature, and maybe in future years they can help us address this in a way that yields a more efficient operation organization.
Well, and maybe it's something that could go through administrative rules as opposed to legislative change.
I think it's
that a
law is
possibility?
what I think it is.
I think it's just a contractual relationship that just need to go through the Civil Rights Commission to change the way we contract with them. But maybe I'm wrong, I don't know.
Well, they're not
That's why I
motivated.
want-
Yeah, they're not motivated to do it because they get revenues from doing the HUD cases, and so it's
Sure.
their lifeblood too. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not like they're doing something wrong. They're simply trying to compete for dollars. the
Rudy,
same dollars we
let
get.
me ask you a question pertaining to this. Do you find that with the state that they also are going after certain types of cases which may be more lucrative, should we say, than other types, that they may want to handle and let us handle certain types that might not be reimbursable or on a contractual
Sure.
basis with either HUD or EEOC or whoever else?
That only makes logical sense when they've already expressed that their motive is to generate revenues from that process.
And what kind of cases would that generally be that are the better cases to
Municipal
handle?
services cases, municipal services,
Housing.
public accommodation cases. There's nobody reimbursing folks for those. They're aggressively pursuing fair housing cases, wherever they can get them, because that's the most lucrative contract with the federal government. They get reimbursed $2,600 a case. The process that Halley described of them screening cases is an instrument for them to close them real quickly administratively and still get paid. And it's not necessarily a good service to the citizens, all right? It's a way of screening out complaints so that they don't have to investigate them. And it's really a disservice to not just the person that is complaining, but it's to the respondent that should be exonerated if they did nothing wrong.
And I think I would agree with Rudy, but I would just, and our screening process I don't think would have to mirror exactly what the state does, but I think it is a means to get rid of the unmerited cases and save a significant amount of time in your department.
No, we identify those pretty quickly.
Okay.
We do.
They don't reimburse for unmerited or unfounded cases?
No, those appropriately shouldn't be filed.
True.
All right? But you don't know until you probe into it and get more details. And yeah, and so yes, they would be reimbursed in many cases, even though they were unfounded. In a great many cases. And that's what Iowa Civil Rights relies on with their screening instrument. If you heard what I think Carl Schilling stated, who had worked there for 25 years and had also worked for the Des Moines Commission for a number of years.
Okay.
Thank you, Rudy.
All right, I think maybe now we have our auditor here.
Can we have Scott maybe do an introduction and then we'll kick it off, Mr. Mayor?
And then we'll quickly get a review of the audit. Scott?
Good morning, Mayor, Council. Scott Sanders, Finance Director. I think I'll be brief here in introducing Heidi Hobkirk. I'll get that right. With McGladrey, who's been assisting the city for a couple of years now. And this is in reference to the June 30, 2011 audit CAFR that was complete. And you should all have a copy of that. So I'll turn it over to Heidi, and I appreciate you coming this one.
Thank you. Apologize for being tardy.
Understandable this morning.
Yes. I just have a very brief presentation that's a quick overview of the audit, so I'll wait until everybody has one. But I'll mainly be going through the handout that I'm sending around currently. I'm just going to briefly touch on some auditor communications that we're required to do to the City Council and a summarized 2011 financial performance, and touch very briefly on the single audit. On page 2 is the list of the required auditor communications with you. The first one is our responsibility as auditors, and that's that we audit the city under 3 auditing standards: generally accepted accounting principles, governmental auditing standards, and the OMB A133 circular. And the city received a clean or unqualified opinion under all of those standards in the current year, as they have in the past. There were 2 new GASBs that were implemented in the current year. The one had no effect because it covered derivatives and external investment pools, which the city does not hold. The other one was GASB 54, which changed the fund balance for governmental funds. So that did result in a restatement due to the implementation of the GASB, as you'll see in footnote 17 of the CAFR, if you want more information on that. But what happened was the special revenue funds definition changed, so that required some of your existing special revenue funds that had their own column in the back of the statements had to be merged into another fund that it met, because it wasn't a standalone fund under the new definitions. And there's more information in that note 17 in regards to that. The other big change in GASB 54 was the fund balance definitions. It used to be a reserved and unreserved fund balance, and now there's 5 categories, which are unspendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned. So it's taking more of an approach with the restrictions versus reservations. I just want to remind you that all financial statements have management judgments and estimates, and we did review those that the city includes in their CAFR, and we agreed with their methodology and their reasoning for those estimates and found no problem with those. The next several things listed, there were none, so no audit adjustments in the current year, no disagreements, no consultations with other accountants, no significant issues discussed, and no difficulties encountered. The staff was very forthcoming with information for us and provided us all the information we needed to do the audit, and we appreciate that. Not only the finance department, but we reach several departments throughout the city in order to perform our audit, and wouldn't be able to do that with all of their help and assistance and information they provide us. Any questions over the auditor communication? If not, on the next page is the total revenue for all governmental funds. At the top has the total revenues, and you did see about a $12 million increase in the current year, or about 5%. The majority of that increase is in the intergovernmental column. You can see there of the bar graph, and that went up about $10 million, and that category includes all your federal and state granting. So from one year to the next, that can fluctuate depending on the funding available, how the city is spending it. The majority this year were due to your bridge projects, which was up about $4 million, and also increases in your community development block grant and community services. Any questions?
Just to clarify, I'm assuming the blue is 2010 and the green is 11?
Correct.
Okay.
The next slide is the expenditures of those same governmental funds, and you did see about $11.6 million increase, or 3.6 increase. And again, the majority of that was in your capital outlay, which is your expenditures for capital projects related to what I just talked about. The bridge projects were up and street projects were up compared to the prior year. A lot of that funding being supported by federal and state grants.
The revenue and the expenses, can you go into that a little bit? Revenue was 277 million, expenses 338. The revenue, all governmental funds. Expenditures by function, all governmental funds.
Oh, that it was more than the
So
revenues.
it's quite a bit more, yeah, the expense side.
And I'm not, did you budget that?
I guess my real question is, where did we cover the difference in? How was the difference covered?
Debt?
Am I looking at that correctly?
There was debt issued this year, and that would be below, that would go outside of the revenue. So any bond proceeds that you received, which you did issue debt.
But we have, what is it, a $50 million difference there in the revenue?
And you would have also pulled from your fund balance, which is carryover from year to year. You have a positive fund balance.
Okay.
That was decreased.
Okay, so it was, the fund balance was decreased, so we'll have less of a fund balance this year.
And some
Sorry.
capital funds from the previous year that were held over.
Yes, it
Bond
could have been
proceeds.
too.
I'll confirm that was bond,
Okay.
a big portion of that was bond proceeds from the previous year.
Okay.
They're still held.
Okay,
So again, it's a timing issue. The
Okay.
general fund, very healthy, you'll see, and
Yes.
that's
Okay.
not a reduction at all, main operating funds.
okay.
And actually, you issued $110 million worth of debt in the current year, so that would have covered, the debt issued in the current year probably covered the majority of that.
Okay,
Because most of that debt was for capital projects, which is where you saw the large increase in your expenditures. And overall, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Overall, you did have a positive change in fund balance, so none of, except for one fund, which was the tax increment fund, all the other fund balances did increase. So it was those bond proceeds that covered the difference. Any other questions on revenue or expenditures? The last slide I have is the operating income, which does not include depreciation and amortized expense, which is more of a non-cash expenditure for your enterprise. And each column is a separate enterprise fund, so your airport, parking, sewer system, et cetera. Just wanted to point out here in 2011, all except for the housing fund showed a positive operating income before that depreciation expense. And one thing I did want to point out is housing received $1.5 million to offset that negative $2 million in capital grants and contributions, which is, again, shown outside of operations, but is monies they received in to help cover those operations. It's where the standards require us to show that information in the financial statements.
So can we just go on, because I was looking at the municipal housing, trying to figure out what the budget that's actually being submitted, and I've not actually seen the numbers. I was trying to get that and look at it. Have we seen the numbers for municipal housing? I mean, I looked through the housing. I looked in the housing operating, but it's all together, so you can't, do we have it just separated out?
Oh, we can go back and separate that, like on page 113 of the budget.
Yeah, but it's all with, it's all together. And so based upon what you're saying, the audit, we had a loss, an operating loss in municipal housing for the last 2 years then?
Yes, based on operating revenues and operating expenditures. There are non-operating income and expenditures that incur, but this year, other than the 1.5 in capital grants, the other portions were small.
If it would be helpful, what we can do is tie the budget document to the audit numbers.
That would be
so that
helpful.
you can kind of see how the projected moving forward is anticipated.
Well, I think it's just more discussion that we need to have with some of the units that we have, and how do we want to move forward with those? I mean, if we're operating at a loss,
Right.
and we have been operating at a loss, I mean, it's been up and down, but we're saying here is we have 2 years where we've operated at a loss, correct?
I believe that is true, and there is a strong fund balance yet today, but you're right that it's been reduced.
Yeah.
And the housing.
Okay, yeah.
I think to some extent the variability here is related to federal allocations that we're getting or not getting that have been declining. So you have expenses that are like this and revenues that are dropping because of the federal reductions. And what Doug Roeming has done, and I think we've talked about here at this table, is put together a whole series of recommendations that are designed to address that shortfall on an ongoing basis, and that'll be reflected in the budget, but it's not reflected here.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? The last piece, I don't have a slide for, I was going to speak to, is the single audit, and just wanted to let you know that we did perform a single audit over your federal expenditures from those grants, and there were no findings in the current year. Any other questions for me?
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Stay available. We may have some as we move forward.
Okay, and Scott knows how to get a hold of us, so please feel free to reach out to us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody have any additional questions of Scott? Looks like he's ready and available to just like get all over any and all of it. Anything? Mr. Manager, anything? All right. Why don't we, pretty early in the morning, but let's open it up for public comment. Anyone in the public have some comments they would like to make this morning? If not, we'll look forward to seeing you all this evening. Have a great day. We are adjourned.